This is an old Goodman or Janitrol model GMP furnace. And probably from the middle 90s, most of these things should be dead and gone by now. Shouldn't even be here anymore. But this is a test mule I had laying around the shop, so I've been asked about, you know, how you'd replace a heat exchanger in one of these things. And the heat exchanger is not a huge deal to replace on these things. These things had a lot of failures in the heat exchanger, and so we got to where we replaced an awful lot of them. I got it down to I could replace one of these in about an hour and a quarter. A lot of other furnaces were quite a bit longer, but this is also a very simply put together furnace. And if you get a new heat exchanger, I thought, well, we can go ahead and show you how to put this thing in with the least amount of troubles. Now this was, because this is a test mule, there's no piping here. Of course, you're going to have to shut your gas off. There's going to be a gas cock out here somewhere. And of course, you're going to shut your power off. And once you've done that, you're going to disconnect your piping. Now there may be a flex line coming in here, there may be hard pipe and a union. All you have to do is just break the union or break that flex line and get it out of the cabinet. Now the next thing, what I want you to do is take a picture of this with your phone, because these wires are going to have to be individually removed, and you want to be sure you put them back in the right spot. So take several pictures of it to be sure you've got all the angles. Like here's pressure switch, here's the inducer, here's the tubing going to the inducer, hot surface igniter wiring, and we have the limit switch wiring here and here. We have the flame sensor wiring there. And there's a limit switch right here that has to be actually removed. So what I would say to you is you would go ahead and take a picture of this thing so that you know how it goes back together when you put it back in. Okay, once we've removed the gas piping and so on and shut this thing down, we can start removing wires. And pressure switch wires there, inducer wires here, you will note sheet metal loves to cut you up. It does it every chance you can. If you come out from doing one of these things without a few injuries to your hands, you're lucky. Okay, limit switch, hot surface igniter, flame rod. Now these rollout switches, rollout switch here, rollout switch here, rollout switch there, I would just leave that wiring in except for the last wire. On this one, there's a wire going down here. I would pull it off, and you only have to take off one wire off of the gas valve. The rest of these wires, they can all stay on there because this whole assembly is going to be removed. The one thing you do need to get out is the hot surface igniter. That's right here. If you can take it out, you can take this whole assembly here is what we're taking out. You can remove it without taking the hot surface igniter out, but it's pretty easy to damage. Pretty easy to damage anyway. But I'm going to pull it out once your hot surface igniter is loose, you can bring it out. Now remember, this thing's going to be really delicate, so place it off someplace where it's not going to get knocked around. We're going to pull this out. I use extensions. You can get a 5/16 driver like this. It's long. A lot of guys use that. I guess I'm too cheap to buy them. Okay, that comes out and gets set aside. Now we're going to remove this pressure switch here because it's going to be in the way. Okay, with the pressure switch removed, pull the hose off, set that aside. Now what you've got here is all these screws here. Now one of the things you can do to make it a little faster is use a drill. These guys are just nasty enough to have one screw on the inducer that doesn't want to come off with the driver. Okay. Now you've got all these screws out, but you can't get this one, the ones on the top, you can't get off without removing this. You don't actually have to remove this, you just have to move it up. So there's screws on the side, there's 2 screws on either side here, and I'm going to take those out. Now, if you got one of these little magnetic things, these are nice to hold all the screws so you don't lose the silly things. This thing, in this case, there's no ductwork on it. I can actually take it all the way off. You're not going to have that because your ductwork's going to be there. Okay, the manifold's off. Some of these come with a manifold and some of them didn't. So I'm just showing it coming off. Right now, your heat exchanger is ready to come out. Got just barely enough room to get this silly thing out of here. So that's the heat exchanger pulled out. Now I don't have a new heat exchanger for this because this is just a piece of junk sitting in here. So you're going to reassemble this whole thing. Now I'll kind of give you a quickie view on that. Yours is going to be harder to put in because you're going to have ductwork up here. This isn't going to be an open space. There's going to be ductwork there. Now, if you can start one of the screws in the bottom first. Now I'd recommend rather than leaving all this dusty stuff in the bottom, I'm leaving it in there with this thing, but you should clean that up before you put the new heat exchanger in. Okay, with one of the screws in the bottom, that makes it a lot easier to put the rest of this heat exchanger together. Okay, now what I've done, I put in these screws here along the bottom. I've put one here and one here also. Don't put these in because the manifold has to go over them. And don't put these in because the burner assembly has to be there. Okay, now what you've got here is a manifold assembly that if they did not provide that, then you're going to have to reseal this. Now if they gave you this strip of insulation, you just take that off and scrape it and put it on. If you didn't get, you still need to take this stuff off and use some high temperature silicone in there. That'll work fine. Same thing here on the inducer. If you get the strips, put them in. If not, you're going to have to use silicone on them. I should also note there is a restrictor plate in here that goes between these two. This must be installed. If it's not installed, the furnace is not going to work properly. It's going to pull too much air through it. And notice this is all busted up. If you know, they're always seem to be busted up on these things because they're plastic. They say when you put the vent pipe on, you're supposed to pre-drill the screws. Nobody does. They just put zip screws in them and it just breaks. It's best to replace that if you can get the part. Okay, I put the limit switch back in. You can't put it in wrong because these you can't put it in upside down because the screws are offset. So you can put that in. Now I will say one thing. If you're replacing a heat exchanger and it has been kicking this switch off, I would replace the switch. Usually what happens is one of these rollout switches, probably the top one, but there's three here. If the rollout switch has been kicking off, I would replace it. Generally, this one's going to be the one that's going to kick off. But whichever one does, can't hurt to replace all three if you want. Anyway, this is ready for this assembly to go back in. Now get your hot surface igniter back in. Carefully so that you don't break the silly thing. Okay, hot surface igniter's in. Now you can hook your wiring back up. Hot surface igniter's pretty simple because it has a plug for it. It's all one way. To yellow, go to the pressure switch. Doesn't make any difference which one goes where. Black and white, they go to the inducer. Again, it doesn't make any difference which side they go on. Blue goes to the gas valve. Hopefully you did not take any of the other wires off of it. You've got two wires right here that go to the limit switch. You're lucky on these. These are 2/10 of an inch instead of a 1/4 inch for the push-ons. And so, whereas you could put larger ones on, they don't fit very well, but you could put larger ones on. the small ones will fit there and they won't fit anyplace else. Okay, this wire here goes to the limit switch. Okay, and this last one goes to the flame rod. Okay, you've got all your wiring back hooked up now. When I go to check the manifold pressure, I got a 3/16 Allen in there on the gas valve. I'm going to pull that out without the machine running, with no power to it, and gas off and all that sort of stuff. I'm going to pull that out and I'm going to put a fitting in there and test the manifold pressure. Okay, now we're going to turn the gas on, we're going to turn the power on, and we're going to set the thermostat above the structure temperature. That's what I'm doing with a couple of wires put together here. And we should, the hot surface igniter should come on, and the furnace should light off. Okay, once this thing is going, I would be checking the flame rod. Pull the wire off the flame rod. Should shut off within about a half a second, which it did. One other thing I would do, I would go down here, again using your camera, I would pull off the white wire from the fan. This is with the power off. Pull it off, put it someplace where it's not going to short, and fire this thing off. Okay, the burners are running, but the fan is not going to come on because I pulled that wire off. Okay, so the burner's shut off. You can reconnect your fan switch with the power off again and fire the machine up and make sure it runs normally. You've checked your limit at that point. You've checked your manifold input. Once you're all done, check every place that you've disturbed here. Don't bother checking here. That's not going to help. Let's try it again. So the limit has kicked off and it's fired off. Anyway, that's how to change a heat exchanger in the GMP Goodman furnace. That's it on this one.